Okay, hello everybody. It's Randy Nordby. Want to talk to you a little bit today, well actually a lot today, about performance evaluation. Now, I have to warn you, a lot of the candidates that I've worked with in the past, they haven't liked this section very much. And why? Because there are a lot of calculations, there's a lot of things going on, and quite frankly, most of these techniques that you're going to be reviewing today are much better served through spreadsheets and computers, but we're going to have to know how to do these. Now, I want you to realize as you go through the exam, they're not going to be so many calculations that it's not possible to finish it. There's going to be a well-balanced of calculations, maybe parts of calculations, also understanding the material on the qualitative side as well. So again, the best advice that I can give you with this is you're going to have to go through it maybe a couple of times. And the other thing that I want to kind of caution you on, in some of these sections that we covered today, there are going to be some data sets that we use for multiple slides, and it's very hard to keep going back and forth and showing the original slide and then going forward in the new material. So there are going to be some slides that I'm going to reference that maybe you should print out or copy from your deck and just hold those onto those as you go through the material, because it'll make it so much easier to go back and reference. Okay, so let's jump into performance evaluation and let's get going. Okay, so why does this even matter? Well, it's going to be important to managers, sponsors, and clients. I need to understand what are the key drivers of both risk and return. And as I mentioned in the beginning, some of these calculations, if done in full, can be extremely, I really like that, extremely tedious. They are, and they're literally best left to spreadsheets and software programs. But again, it's important also that you understand them, but just realize that a lot of these tools and techniques, it's going to be more focusing on the word evaluation. You know, it's unlikely you're going to be calculating these in the real world, but you will need to understand how these work for the exam. Okay, so for the exam, I want you to expect the calculations to be reasonable. Also, expect a fair balance of calculations and understanding the qualitative concepts. Okay, you guys got through level 2, you can get through this. It's not anywhere near as quantitative as what you've already been through. Okay, the other thing that I want to point out is that there is a sizable amount of material in this reading that overlaps with previous readings. So it kind of is nice because it gives you sort of a refresher on other areas. And again, it will help you identify areas that you're just not so good with yet. Okay, so when we're dealing with a large institutional portfolio, it's very common to have multiple investment managers. Some of them are in-house, some of them are third-party. Now also, these decisions are going to be made by the fund sponsor about who to hire if you go outside or which portfolio manager you're going to use inside, but there are also going to be decisions made by those individual portfolio managers that you hire. And both the sponsor's decisions and the portfolio manager's decisions are going to affect portfolio performance. So just like we did in trading, if we want to be able to identify, okay, who did well, who did poorly? Did the sponsor make a bad tactical asset allocation weight? Or maybe this fund manager that we hired just isn't very good. Okay, so performance evaluation can deconstruct, just like in trading with deconstructing information shortfall, now we're deconstructing performance. Okay, and I want to know whose decisions added or subtracted value for this fund. Okay, so this fund sponsor's perspective, it's going to capture all the value added or lost. Now, the portfolio manager's perspective is only going to focus on what the portfolio manager did for that fund. So let's put this into perspective. If the sponsor decides to overweight in their overall portfolio small cap stocks, okay, that's a tactical asset allocation they made, and we can determine, did that decision make any sense? But once they hire that small cap manager, the small cap manager is going to be making decisions in regard to his or her fund, and then we're going to analyze, did that fund manager actually add or lose value? So again, there are multiple levels of this evaluation that are going on. So the objective of this reading is very simple. We want to evaluate any investment decisions made by both the plan sponsors and the portfolio managers. And we want to give kudos to the people that do great. And we want to basically identify who's not performing and who's not doing a good job. Okay, so what are the components of performance evaluation? So I want you to think of portfolio evaluation. It's a process, okay? There are a lot of components, and many of these can get very complicated, especially when we get into attribution. So let's go through step by step. So first thing, performance measurement. Okay, what return did you get? Let's compute the return. Before we analyze any returns, we need to figure out, how'd you do? Okay, the next part, this is where it can get extremely quantitative. We're going to attribute the performance, and ultimately, what do I mean by that? We're going to determine the source of the return. And then we're going to assign blame or assign praise to whoever made those decisions. And then the last component, I think, is actually one of the more interesting. And again, performance attribution is mostly done through computers. Performance measurements mostly done through computers. The performance appraisal part, yes, there are some calculations, but there's also a lot of human judgment here. And here's what I want you to think about with performance appraisal. We really want to drill down. Was this portfolio manager just lucky this year or this time we reviewed the returns? Or do they have skill? And is it repeatable? Can they continue to keep doing what they're doing, or was this just a lucky year? So performance appraisal is going to talk about the sustainability or the consistency. Was this portfolio manager lucky, or do they show some skill? Because I would like to basically hire and keep employed the portfolio managers that demonstrate skill, not the ones that are lucky. Okay, so I like this slide because it kind of twists this around to three questions that I would want to know as a portfolio manager, and you would too. So what performance did the fund achieve during this period? Okay, well, that's performance measurement. How did the fund manager achieve their performance? Did they overweight a particular sector? Did they completely avoid a sector? So that's performance attribution. And then the third question, again, that we're trying to answer, did the portfolio manager achieve their performance just by luck? Because again, if they're just getting these returns by luck, I'm not so sure that they're going to continue to do that in the future, and it makes me suspicious of their returns. Okay, so we're going to get into performance attribution. We're going to talk about this a little bit now. So one thing I need to tell you, it's going to be crucial to analyze the results of performance attribution as part of the portfolio management or evaluation process. You cannot skip any of these three steps, and performance attribution is a key component. Now, this is also extremely important. If performance attribution is going to be useful to you at all, it has to account for all aspects of the fund's risk and return. If it just accounts for part of it, then it's suspect. I cannot decipher or use any of that data to make an informed decision. Okay, so an attribution that does not account for the total risk and return, it's misleading at best, and it cannot be relied upon for any meaningful analysis. Okay, so I won't spend any more time dealing with that topic, but just understand that it's got to explain all the fund's risk and return, or it's a waste of your time to do it. Okay, so what is an effective performance attribution process? What does it look like? And for the exam, I would make sure maybe I could define a couple of these and pull these up in case you have to add basically or evaluate a performance attribution system. So number one, just talked about this, it has to reflect 100% of the portfolio's return and or risk exposure. It's also got to reflect the portfolio manager's current decision-making process. We need to know the decisions that were taken by the portfolio manager. And I need a full explanation of this excess return and risk. So again, great points, great nuggets that you can use as we go forward. Okay, so now we're still in attribution. Well, now we want to deal with both sides of the coin. Remember, it is not okay to just focus on return. You have to also to add risk as well. We need to evaluate both return and risk. It's two sides of the coin. When you're out playing golf with your buddies, everybody talks about the return piece, but they very seldom talk about the risk that they took to get that. Okay, so what is return attribution? I basically want to evaluate the decisions that were made by the portfolio manager that impacted returns. And same thing with risk. It's parallel, except I don't want to focus on the portfolio manager's impact on returns. I want to focus on that portfolio manager's impact on the portfolio risk. Again, so we're assessing, did this portfolio manager do well? Did they do poorly? And how did they do this? Okay, so risk is generally going to be compared to some relative benchmark. You notice benchmark keeps coming up more and more in the material, and it should, because any evaluation we have to have a reference point. Now we're also going to get to in a little while, when you're dealing with alternative investments especially, it is extremely difficult to benchmark these. And unfortunately, in the real world, the CFA brings this to light. There are a lot of benchmark used in alternative investments that I've seen numerous times that, quite frankly, are inappropriate. They're misleading also, and they could help investors make bad decisions. Okay, so we're going to really focus on this idea of benchmarks much more as we move forward. So with this benchmark, we can calculate it in absolute terms. We can also calculate it independent of a benchmark. So what I want you to think about for this relative-based risk attribution analysis, it's not going to be appropriate for a portfolio manager who has an absolute target return investment goal. Okay, we need to get apples to apples comparisons to make any type of meaningful analysis. Okay, so let's talk about micro versus macro. The easiest way to think about this, I want you to think micro is going to be at the portfolio manager level, and macro is conducted at the sponsor level. Now, this is probably the easiest way, and it's probably generalizing it a little too much, but I think it gives you a good perspective on who are we talking about here. So micro attribution is going to be at the portfolio manager's level. And think of it as doing your due diligence. I want to verify that the portfolio manager did what they said they would, and I want to understand the drivers of that portfolio manager's return. Okay, now macro, in contrast, this is going to be now at the fund sponsor's level. and it is commonly used in institutional investments, which makes sense because these are huge funds, and that's typically why we analyze these at a macro level. Now, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at these tactical asset allocation decisions that they made to move away from their long-run strategic asset allocation. And I want to find out, did these decisions add value or did they hurt the performance? Okay, then as we get into performance attribution, there are multiple methods. For the exam, I would like you to know these three methods. They do come up fairly frequently on exams, and they're not too bad to understand. So we have three multiple methods for performance attribution. The first one is return-based, the second one is holdings-based, and the third one is transaction-based attribution. And just like we do with any model, I want you to know strengths and I want you to know weaknesses, okay? Because that'll really help you figure out if this is an appropriate use of this model, maybe on a CFA exam question. So how do you know which method to use? Well, first of all, in the question, they're likely going to tell you which method to use. But in the real world, how do we determine which one of these methods we use? Well, it's going to depend, first of all, on what's the availability of the data. Each of these three methods require different amounts of data and different types of data. And then, what are we trying to measure? So the available data and really the purpose of why we're doing this attribution will guide us into which of the three methods we need to select. Okay, so returns-based attribution. I'm going to give you an easy way to memorize this. The R in returns, I want you to think of the R in regression. Okay, so this is just a regression. It's going to isolate the class components through indexes that would have generated these returns. This is the key. And also, this is a disadvantage. There is no attempt to determine the actual holdings of the portfolio. So wait a second, you're analyzing my portfolio and you didn't even look at what I owned. No, they don't. They run regressions of broad market indices and they're run against the performance to decompose investment performance. Okay? Running regressions, it's cheap, it's easy, it's available. Those are all advantages, but the disadvantage is you never looked at the actual holdings of my portfolio. So what I want you to think about, since you never looked at my portfolio, this is going to be slow to detect style drift. Okay, you said you were a value manager. Why are you buying all these growth stocks? It's not going to show up very quickly through returns-based attribution. Now, what's a second idea or the second model? It's the holdings-based attribution. Now we are going to look at what you own. So the only thing is we're going to use the beginning of the period portfolio assets. And the more we do this, the accuracy is going to improve. So if we do it, monthly to weekly to daily, the only problem is this is very labor intensive and it's costly to run compared to just running a simple regression. Now, the weakness of this model, because you don't adjust for any portfolio changes after the initial evaluation period, frequently it's not going to match the final portfolio returns. Okay, so that's absolutely a weakness. But a strength of this model is that it is going to detect style drift much faster than that regression model. At least you're looking at my holdings. Okay, but the weakness of this is that unfortunately it's not adjusting for these portfolio changes, so it doesn't match the actual final portfolio. Okay, so how can we improve upon this? Well, let's dive into this problem just a little bit more with holdings based. So this mismatch, We call it a timing or trading effect. So because of this, we're going to recommend that holdings-based analysis be used for passive funds or any strategy that has very little turnover. Okay, so then we're going to minimize this timing or trading effect. Now, again, we've talked about this. It actually can detect style drift much faster, and at least you're looking at the holdings. Yes, it's more costly, but it provides more information. So we need to make sure that we have the availability of the data in order to use this method. Okay, now the third and final method, transaction-based attribution. So it's going to improve upon the holdings-based attribution by doing what? By updating the portfolio and basically recognizing these changes. So recognizing these subsequent trades. So both the weights and the returns of the portfolio are going to reflect the actual transactions, and it's going to bring in transaction cost. Now, what is a weakness? Well, unfortunately, this is the most complicated, the most time-consuming, and the most expensive to implement. And you need a lot more data. Do you have that data? Is it available? You might want to use the transaction-based, but maybe all you have the data for is to do the regression. So again, what data you have and what the goal of the attribution analysis is going to determine which one of these three attribution methods you're going to choose, and each of the methods have strengths and weaknesses. I think these are great questions for the exam. I've seen them on many past exams, so make sure you understand this.